to make it even more special, I'm going to like briefly roll just a few seconds so you can see how young and handsome we were 6 years ago. So, I mean, that's the blast from our past. There's young Brandon. He was sitting in a very dark room when he was there before. But anyway, I just thought we'd take that trip down memory lane.
6 years, less facial hair, better lighting. Probably have a few more
Yeah,
gray hairs now too.
everybody, this is Gary Smith with Nectar Bridge. This is Huntsville Biz Talk, and I got a special guest here, Brandon Wilson. He has the distinction of being my first repeat customer on the podcast. He came on 6 years ago when I was doing this in Montgomery, Alabama. He was with a franchise company, a different franchise company at the time, a specific franchise offering. And today he works with the Perfect Franchise. And Brandon, I'm going to say, introduce yourself and tell me about the company, the Perfect Franchise. What's going on with that?
Yeah, no, glad to be back 6 years later. So yeah, a little bit different environment now, but yeah. So the Perfect Franchise. So have been with this group now for 2.5 years, almost 3 years. But last time we talked was with a company called Office Pride Commercial
Right.
Cleaning, helping grow the franchise side of that brand. That was really my first foray into franchising. And most people think of franchising McDonald's, restaurants, Subways, Dunkin', whatever there. But Office Pride was my first glimpse into what's actually out there, where franchising kind of comes into the mix. After that, ended up joining a startup company that was helping other franchise brands grow, worked with 9 different franchisors in a period of about 3-4 years, and got some great experience there, but kept seeing a little bit of a gap when you're working for the franchisor side of things. Everyone you talk to, you're trying to fit them through the lens of, is this person a fit for this one brand? You talk to a lot of great people that could do really well as business owners, maybe not with the brand that you're working. And that's where the Perfect Franchise really came to be, is launched with the focus of franchisee first. So helping someone who's exploring business ownership, who thinks, hey, a business, maybe I want to get into a franchise. Where do I start? So what we do at the Perfect Franchise is have a process we take people through to actually help them figure out what that really means. What is franchising? How does that fit in? How can that fit in with their lifestyle, their goals, their market, financial capacity, etc.? Take them through this process to ultimately match them to different brands that align with them at the individual level, go through due diligence, and at the end of the day, make a smart decision around franchising. So that's a lot of fun. Get to work with a lot of different brands, a lot of different backgrounds of people, and keeps things fresh.
Yeah, that sounds like a great concept. I remember when we talked 6 years ago thinking about, I came away from that interview thinking Office Pride was a great company. And yet, that idea of, as an individual who might be interested in getting into a franchise system, somebody needing to be kind of an advocate for that person who is looking at a potential opportunity, making sure it's a good fit for them, and making a great decision. So that sounds like that's lined right up with that. You touched on it already. Everybody's got a mental picture of what a franchise is, and it is burned into my brain, like you said. It's like my own just, it's probably from when I was 6 years old. I think franchise and I think Kentucky Fried Chicken or something. And yet, that's so much more than that. Also, people talk about like sports teams, sports clubs as a franchise, and even like creative ideas like a particular movie series as that's a franchise. And it is in that sense of the word. But in the generic sense, like school of business, business model, what is a franchise system?
Yeah, so it's a good question. You got different types of franchises. So what I'm involved in is really the business format franchising is the technical term for it. So that's going to be anything from McDonald's to, I mean, there's 4,000 franchise brands operating in the US, all different industries. The football teams, NFL, all the sports teams, they do actually fall under that. There's some exceptions there with large investments going into it. So a little bit of a
Right.
different animal, but ultimately with business format franchising, there's 3 things that the Federal Trade Commission looks for to determine is something a franchise. So one is a trademark, common name,
Right.
common branding, The next is significant controller assistance. And that's one that sounds a little bit more overbearing than it could be. That could be anything from, hey, Gary, we've got this marketing plan that we've developed. We're going to train you on it. We're going to give you all the tools, all the access, the systems for how to run this business successfully. We're going to train you on it, provide ongoing coaching. That would check that box. And then you've got the third, which is a required payment. So anything really from an upfront initial franchise fee. So even if, as low as, hey, Gary, I'm going to charge you $1,000 for all this, would satisfy that condition there. But at the end of the day, it's a way for brands, for businesses to expand and grow their intellectual property. And in this sense, that intellectual property is the playbook for running a successful business.
I'm going to kind of touch on that statement you made about control and assistance. And that's,
Yeah.
to me, really key to it because, and I'm going to try to stay away from fast food. It's like, a trades business. If you, as a customer, get a service call from a company like Neighborly and they bring an electrician out, there's a consistency as a customer that you expect. Like if you move to another town and you went from one place to another and used a Neighborly electrician in both places, you would expect to have a similar interface, maybe even the same CRM. So you're already listed as a customer, maybe, maybe not, depending on how that thing's set up. But it's funny in my head, control and assistance are very tightly bound concepts. The company is telling you as a franchisee to some extent how you're going to do business, but in a way that's a lot of what you're paying for, isn't it? That you're not as an entrepreneur having to reinvent the wheel.
That's 100% it. And it's funny you brought up Neighborly and their electrician brand. I can look out my window right now and see three Mr. Electric vans from Neighborly at one of my neighbors' houses. So big presence in Huntsville. But yeah,
Yeah.
it is a big part of what you're paying for. It is a big part of the benefit. So instead of going out and trying to start something from scratch, go through that iterative learning process of, hey, does this work? How do I get customers? What marketing strategies work? What CRM systems are going to be best for this? How do I streamline that customer experience that Gary gets the same service that Joe got, the same experience that Jill got down the street? So that is a huge element to it. And that's not a fit for everybody. There are people who are way too entrepreneurial for franchising that they want to go in, they want to break stuff, they want to tinker and figure everything out on their own, and that's okay. There's a spot for that. You look at someone like Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, they would have been a terrible franchisee. Very, very successful and as business owners, but would be terrible franchisees because they couldn't operate within that established system and playbook. So I see it more as a sweet spot between that true entrepreneurship, figure everything out on your own, and more of that traditional, maybe corporate environment of, hey, we've got the infrastructure, we've got the back end, we've got the teams, the support that we can reach out to. So it's a blend, kind of the best of both worlds there.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to kind of go on with that maybe a little bit more on that idea of there are people who are really cut out for being a franchisee, and there are people who would just be better off just going on their own. You've touched on it. Go on with that a little bit. Like when you are talking to somebody, what are maybe some personality traits, or if you want to call them red flags, green flags, however you want to put that, that make you think this person is going to be a great fit, or, I'd really be better off advising this person to just go on their own way.
Yeah. So do you know anyone, can you think of anyone that just whenever you tell them how to do something or you show them a way of doing something, they push back immediately? It's just that natural instinct of theirs is to buck the authority, buck the system. That is a natural.
Hopefully,
What's
hopefully I
that?
won't offend some of my clients, but like I'm tempted to say at least half of my clients, because that is a very entrepreneurial trait. And sometimes this is really meant as an insult. I don't mean it this way, but I have a bit of this trait myself. Smartest guy in the room. Like I think I know what I'm doing. And, you have to moderate that with some humility. But if that is kind of like your first instinct every time, I think I get what you're saying.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is going to conflict pretty heavily with the franchise business model. So, who franchising was really built for? It's the person who wants to have the ownership. They want to have more control of their schedule, their flexibility, their time, more control of the upside, their earning potential, and they're okay ceding some of that iterative piece, that figuring things out. They're able to check the ego at the door and say, hey, this person or this company already has a way of doing it. It's been successful. I want to just be able to tap into that. I want to focus on scaling. I want to focus my efforts on execution versus figuring out what works and what doesn't. So you can get to the same end goal with a franchise as you can an independent business. It's just different pathways how you get there. And for some people, franchising makes more sense as the straightforward path of, hey, I plug in, focus on execution, and my goal is to grow this thing, grow it big, rinse and repeat. Others, they're there for the journey. They like that breaking things, trying to fix it themselves.
Right. And that is a great discussion of, I'd call it more the traits based, what is your personality like? What are you going to be happy with or less happy with? That makes a lot of sense. Let's tackle it numerically a little bit,
Sure.
like cost differences. If we'll stay with electricians, if I were coming to you, and I'm not, but if I were an electrician and I say, I'm considering the Mr. Electric franchise, but I think I can also just do this myself. So if I asked you, well, what's it going to cost me to get connected with Mr. Electric or Neighborly, that system, versus going out and doing it myself, how would you compare and contrast the costs of doing it both ways?
Yeah, so cost is one piece. You also brought up another important distinction too, is that, looking at the Mr. Electric, for example, assuming that you would need to be an electrician going into that. If you were
Oh, yeah.
starting up independently, absolutely. You're going to have a hard time figuring out the regulatory piece. How do you hire an electrician? How do you get this licensed without,
Right.
legalities there? I would say, based on my knowledge, experience, most of the electrician franchise brands out there, they're not looking for electricians to be the owners. So they have the systems
Right.
for taking someone who's more business minded to come in. Hey, we've got the systems for hiring the electricians, for setting this up compliantly, for growing and scaling. So that's one element. I mean, a lot of the people that go into franchises, they're going into industries that they haven't been in before. It's
I
more about
see.
transferable skill sets and character traits.
Right.
But from a cost standpoint, upfront, it is going to cost you more on the franchise side. So you've got a few things to factor in. Every franchise will have what's called a franchise disclosure document. And not to get too far in the weeds or nerd out on you too much with it, but
Please. I'm here to nerd out and get in the weeds, frankly.
okay,
Yes.
okay. So every franchise is regulated by the Federal Trade Commission. They all have to have this franchise disclosure document. It's published every year. Think of it like an offering memoranda for the franchise. It's got 23 items or sections in it. One of those is a breakdown of any possible expense that a new franchise owner could incur in launching the business and operating that business for the initial period, which is generally at least the first 90 days of operations. So you get this chart, low end range, high end range estimates for everything from the franchise fee, which is the buy in, what you actually give the franchise brand that gets you access to the systems, the processes, the training, all that. Your other expenses, they're things that you'd have starting any other comparable business. So insurance premiums, your business licenses, computer technology systems, marketing spend, wages for employees, working capital. So it's all encompassing. Now, why I say franchising is going to be more upfront is because you know all the figures up front. It's not figuring it out as you go, it's not bootstrapping. So
Right.
which
I
I
get
think
that.
is a downside for a lot of independent businesses is people get into it and undercapitalize the business. They don't have proper expectations for what it takes to achieve the scale they need to make the business successful. And that's a difference there with franchising is you have it all laid out. You can validate that. So that to be a big part of it. But yeah, you're going to have a harder time bootstrapping a franchise compared to an independent startup.
Got it. And I'm just gonna call it out and own it. You kind of got me on the way I phrased that question because I did come at it wrong. In my head, it's like, okay, if I were an electrician, would I look at this? And I guess it could be, but a better way to put that, and let's talk about this for a second, is let me rephrase. Who is the kind of person that would be looking at some kind of trades franchise and saying, I'm not in that trade, but I see that as a potential revenue stream? Like, what kind of person would that be?
Yeah, so this is something I have a lot of visibility into now with what I'm doing is working with people, different buy boxes for businesses.
Right.
Seen a lot in the trade space and blue collar kind of your micro dirty jobs type of
Yeah.
business models. It's people coming from corporate America. A lot of people that are being displaced by AI right now are
Yes.
seeing that pop up. They're looking ahead. They're thinking, okay, I just got
I
laid
need a
off.
sound effect. Ding, ding, ding. AI. Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt. I just,
yeah. No, so they're seeing that. They're seeing the future of, hey, if this is taking some of these white collar jobs where I've built my career, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go from here? Am I going to be laid off again at the next job I find? So they're taking a step back and they're saying, okay, what out there is more resistant to AI? What is a service that needs a human element to it? You can augment some of those with AI. You can enhance it. You can better the business. And a lot of franchise brands are leveraging that. But they're looking for ways that they're looking for repeat business, needs based services, more of that AI proof, resistant business model, more stable, durable businesses. And so that's where the trades tend to come in as it's things that can't be outsourced. It's needed services. Doesn't matter what the economy is doing. Doesn't matter what the technology is that comes out. I don't know that there's going to be robots coming to your house to do your electrical work in the near future. But yeah, so more white collar
I,
backgrounds.
I sincerely doubt there will be anytime soon. I feel like it's self driving. It's like self driving cars. We keep making half the distance to the goal and making progress, but I'm not ready to turn a robot loose in my garage and my box anytime soon. Doubt you are either. So thank you for that. That's a great explanation of like where you're at, where you're coming from. You know, and so far in this conversation, we've been talking about, I'll just say, franchise systems, franchisors that are basically good business models, and that we're talking about that assumption. But what are some red flags that you would advise? Let's say I came up to you and said, I am considering investing in this franchise system and launching a business of my own based on that. What are some red flags that you might see if I were looking at the wrong system or a bad idea?
So I'll preface this with, and I mentioned it earlier, there's about 4,000 franchise brands out there. The majority of them are not worth looking at. The majority of them are not worth investing in. So there's a big
Wow.
spectrum of what's a good franchise and what's not. And it can be hard to tell from the outside looking in. That is a big part of why what I'm doing now kind of enters the picture and has a place in there. And so there's no prerequisite for a brand, for a company to become a franchise. They're not a minimum number of locations or minimum revenue. They don't even have to be profitable or have a business model, even. Someone could have an idea, create that franchise disclosure document, and start offering franchise opportunities. So you see some of that. Now, red flags, that would be one. If there's no proven concept behind it and it is just an idea, you're a guinea pig. You're the one proving it out with your time, your energy, your capital. So infrastructure is a big piece. You want to make sure that there's a good, solid team behind the brand. People who have experience in the industry is going to be one thing. But also as the brand, especially as the brand grows, people with experience in franchising And that's a big distinction because franchising becomes a new business model. So you could have someone who's running an electrical company. They've got a great system. They've got the playbook for how to make this successful. They turn it into a franchise, but they don't have any franchise experience. So they don't know how to navigate supporting franchise owners, coaching them to grow and scale and build businesses. So that's a big element as a system grows. You want to see that. Healthy financials. So in that disclosure document, the FDD, there's a section called the item 19, and that is a financial performance representation section. What that gives the franchise brand the opportunity to do is showcase financial performance from across their locations. So the data has to be able to be substantiated, but showing things like average revenue, gross profits, net profits, they can show any kind of financial information they want, but as long as they can substantiate it. So a more robust item 19 is a big green flag. Now, the other side of that is the only section in that disclosure document that is not legally required. So a brand can choose not to put anything in there. They legally then can't tell you anything about financial of the brand. You ask them how much money can I make? What's the average revenue? Great question, Gary. Can't tell you that. So that makes it a little tricky, but that is a red flag. Especially if it's a brand that's been operating for a while and they have no financial performance data, there's normally a reason they don't have that or that they're not showing that because they certainly have the data. They're just choosing not to include it. So those are a couple. The other is a high franchisee churn. So if there's a lot of franchisees leaving the system every year, that's a red flag. And that's something else you can find in that disclosure document. There's a section that shows number of locations sold, number opened, terminations, non-renewals of the franchise agreement. Good rule of thumb, you want to be under 10% annual churn. Anything beyond
Makes
that,
sense.
you want to start asking questions.
Right. I'm going to ask a question I don't know the answer to. Is the my understanding, which could be wrong, is that a lot of franchise systems have conferences, meetings of franchisees, and so forth. And this is the part I don't know if this is the case or not. Would you, as a prospect, generally be able to attend these sessions and see more about the culture and what's going on?
Generally, no,
Okay.
because typically at those conferences, they're going to be going into KPIs. They're going to be going into training sessions that are,
Okay.
getting into kind of the secret sauce there. So
Right.
that's rare occasions I've seen it where a franchise brand may allow someone to come in, sign an NDA first, and
Okay.
then attend. But it's rare and few and far between where that's allowed.
Okay. So to key it back to what's possible, it sounds like what you really need to be doing is really analyzing the data that they will give you and professional like yourself helping interpret it.
That's part of it. The other big thing, if doing nothing else, is something that we refer to as validation. So while they can't go to the conferences, they can't go to the internal training sessions for the brand, what they can do is reach out to existing franchise owners. And
Yeah.
again, in that disclosure document, in the back of it, every brand has to include all the contact information for every single franchisee in their system,
Oh,
as well
wow.
as anyone who has left the system in the past 3 years. So
Oh, wow. That's surprising.
it
I
is
would
now
not have guessed that.
the people who have left the system. It's their contact information for the last contact information that the franchisor had. A little bit harder to
Yeah.
get in touch with those people generally, but you want to talk to other franchisees in the system. You need to go through the education exploration process with the brand to understand from their perspective the theoretical side of the business, how it works, the support. But then you want to validate all that. You want to be able to talk
Right.
to existing owners and say, hey, Gary, I'm seeing in this disclosure document average revenues are 500,000 a year. What's been your experience?
Right.
Hey, Gary, I
Yeah.
see that,
I get that.
Average net profits are 32%. Does that sound right to you? What's been your experience with the franchisor? Have they been on top of it with support? Have they been proactive with guidance and coaching? Or is it more, hey, call a 1-800 number if you need help kind of thing?
Right.
So you go through enough of those conversations and you want to talk to a good sample size of people. You want to talk to people who are kind of the top performers and see, all right, what are you doing that's putting you above the average? Do I see myself aligning with this person and their background, their skill sets? What are they doing day in and day out? Do I want to be doing that? Do I want to be putting in that level of effort? Talk to people who are having challenges. What are they doing? Do you see yourself more aligning with them? If that's the case, maybe not the right brand for you. Talk to newer owners, talk to people who have been in for a while. So you want to get a good balanced mix of owner types, but that's going to be a key piece for due diligence and
And that sounds like hard work, but very much worth doing, very much needs to be done. And when you mention newer owners versus older owners, I think the newer owners would really be key because they're the ones that are closer to getting the same version of the onboarding support you're going to get, would be
that's
my guess. Like,
you're I couldn't have said it better myself. That's why you want to talk to them is if you talk to someone who's been in for 10 years, man, things have
yeah,
changed. And
exactly.
the 6 years since you and I went on this podcast have changed a lot. So you want to talk
Yeah.
to people, get a more realistic sense of what's current. The downside with talking to some newer owners, that first year is a grind.
Oh,
Doesn't matter
yeah. They're
franchise or not. So you catch them on the wrong day, lose a big opportunity, manager
right.
quits in the last minute. The world's on fire. This could be terrible at, horrible business. You talk to them, a week later. Oh no, everything's great. This is wonderful. You'd be crazy not to do it. So you got to take
Yeah.
all the calls with kind of a grain of salt. You don't want to make a decision based on a single conversation.
Yeah. We should probably get that, really out on the table. Franchise, no franchise, any business, it's just a roller coaster ride, in the first year or two or three. I mean, that's just the way it is. Previous podcast had a guy on talking about the emotional runway and, that it's just tough starting a business. That's a universal truth. You touched on some of this in a general sense, but what are some of the resources that as a would-be franchisee should come into a franchise relationship with? What should they be prepared to spend? What should they be prepared to do, and so on? Maybe some kind of rough parameters. If I don't have these kind of things, I probably shouldn't consider it. Like, what are some minimums?
Yeah. So if you're looking for passive income, purely passive, franchising's not for you. Go put your money in a mutual fund or something there. Doesn't matter what brand it is. There's different ownership models. Some require more hands-on active ownership than others, but they all require effort. So you need to be prepared to put in the time, the effort. It needs to be your priority. So I talk to people that have a full-time job. They're looking at, hey, I want to build something on the side. I want to build something that can create an off ramp from my corporate job and transition it. Can that be done? Yeah, it can, with the right situation. So if you're working 60 hours a week in an office setting, you can't break away at all. That's not going to work. If you have a more flexible job, you're working from home, you can take calls, you can, go out and see a customer if you need to, put out some fires. All right, now we're talking about something that could have some potential there. So you look at that, you need to assess your own character traits, what you're good at, where you struggle, where the gaps are. So when you're looking at franchises, you don't want to do the whole interview thing where there are no weaknesses, or let me turn whatever weakness I'm going to say into a secret positive. No, if you're not good at sales and you're not going to be out networking and joining the Chamber of Commerce, doing the BNI groups, you don't need to go into a business where that is a key determinant of success. You're going to have a bad time. I'll tell you now.
Yeah.
So if you're not good at managing people, you've never managed teams, you don't need to go into a business that is very operations managerial heavy. That's not a good recipe for success. So Knowing yourself is a big part. Other elements, so the financial piece. Every franchise brand is going to have financial requirements for consideration. Now, typically that's going to be minimum net worth and a liquidity amount. Net worth, all your assets minus all your liabilities. Pretty simple to calculate there, at least ballpark wise. Liquidity, a lot of confusion around this. Is that cash I have in my checking account, savings account, stocks, bonds? What is that? It is all your liquid cash, checking, savings, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. But also in this context, retirement accounts generally will count towards liquidity as well. So that's something that is typically in other circumstances not counted, but it is in franchising. But overall, to start really looking at franchises, I'd say the floor there is probably about 250,000 net worth and about a 50,000 liquidity kind of ballpark. So that'll give you enough room to start exploring a lot of different concepts, give you more optionality versus pigeonholing you into saying, hey, Gary, these are, the two brands that, you qualify for kind of thing. So when you get into brick and mortar type concepts, those thresholds go up a bit, but generally the starting point.
I'm going to come back to one thing that you alluded to a couple of questions ago and just comment on people who are starting franchises and don't necessarily have the depth of expertise in the franchising part of it as opposed to the operational part of it. In other words, you could have a good business, but you don't necessarily know how to do franchising as a franchisor. And when you were talking about that, something I thought about is this. I have met a pretty healthy handful of people who had a small business and maybe they had two or three locations and they talk in terms of sometimes I think it's just kind of being colloquial or ignorant. Like they think of themselves as a franchise because they have maybe a couple of business partners running different locations. And I'm going to kind of exclude that. I'm talking people who will say, I want to franchise this. I think we got a franchise concept here. And they may have a solid enough local business, but in the greater scheme of things, they are barely off the ground themselves.
Right.
So I'm just going to echo what you said from my own experience is you want to be really careful talking to somebody who's got a small business because that may be as far as they've gotten. And what they're really asking you to do is come in and partner with them on their small business. And if that is what you want to do, that could be a good idea, but just know you're not getting in a franchise. That is you investing in somebody else's local independent business. And that's a different story.
It's a good distinction, and every franchise does start somewhere. So there are brands that start and they grow that way. But yeah, I mean, when you look at the whole landscape of franchising, and this is kind of a surprising statistic for a lot of people, but out of all the franchise brands out there, and most people think of the fast food brands that they know, they're all over the country, your McDonald's with 40,000 locations kind of thing. Only about 16% of all franchise brands ever will hit 100 open locations. So
Yeah.
the ones that you see that you think of that have thousands of locations, they're an extreme outlier in the whole scheme of things. So that 100 location mark is pretty substantial. That's a significant milestone for franchises, and it's a milestone that most never see. So
Right.
if you're looking at something that is very new, that only has a few locations, it's that kind of local business that just started franchising, keep that in mind. What if it doesn't grow to, 100 locations, 1,000 locations? Are you still going to be happy with it? Is it still going to help you get where you want to go? Are they going to have the resources to actually support you, because most brands don't hit royalty self-sufficiency until they have 50 open locations, meaning the franchisor can't cash flow their support until there's 50 open locations. So
Makes sense.
you yeah, so you do see franchisors go under from being undercapitalized too.
Right. Makes sense. Well, Brandon, as we start to land the plane here, now I'll kind of close with this to cap on to what you just said. Like we've been talking about, there's a wide variety of quality and size and profitability that are potential here. So my first statement would be, if in doubt, make Brandon your first call. Don't jump into anything. Talk to Brandon. He's been at this a long time and he knows what he's doing. So get some advice before you jump into anything. And I think also, even if you're just window shopping, that idea of, if you get nothing else out of this, there are some documents, some financial disclosure documents that, well, first of all, you need to study carefully. And secondly, if they're not there, if we're, doing literal back of the envelope calculations on, here's the thing you want to come in on with me on. Again, not saying it couldn't be an opportunity, but just know you're in a totally different neighborhood and entrepreneurial space if you're looking at that. A established franchise is going to have a lot of disclosure that's just already there for the asking, and then you need to call Brandon. So, as always, end with, what's a question that you wish I'd asked you?
Question that I wished you'd asked. Oh man, I'd say jokingly, if you would ask me what's the best franchise out there, that's always the one that I tend to get.
Okay.
That I chuckle
How
at.
do you answer that one?
Answer it with, it depends. Like,
Okay.
it depends, and because what's good for Gary might be terrible for Brandon, and vice versa there. So but it's a question everybody asks: is what's the best franchise? What's the hottest franchise? What's the most profitable franchise? And it all depends. Or do you have the right profile to do what it takes to make it successful? If you're in a good franchise system at the top 25% of that franchise system, you're going to be doing well. Doesn't really matter if it's franchise A, B, or C.
Right.
So but that's the question with a non-answer that I'd give for you. But
that's what my management professor in my undergrad degree said, is like, that's always the management answer. It depends.
mm-hmm.
So we'll leave it with that. And Brandon, I sure appreciate you coming on today again and explaining franchising with us, and I appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.